He built empires out of concrete and glass. But when Liam Cross stepped into that cold hospital corridor, every deal, every dollar meant nothing. The doctor's words echoed like thunder. She made it. Barely. Grace Miller, the woman he'd once loved, the one he'd walked away from in the name of ambition. Now she lay unconscious, fragile, with a faint heartbeat beside her bed monitor. Then the nurse handed him a small, folded envelope, crumpled, stained with time. Inside was an ultrasound photo, his breath caught, 2 years old, a date that lined up with the day she left. The photo wasn't just an image, it was a confession he was never meant to find. For the first time in his life, the ruthless CEO's eyes filled with tears. He didn't just lose her, he lost them. The night New York drowned in rain, Liam Cross sat alone in his corner office, staring at the skyline he owned. The rain streaked down the windows like tears he'd never allowed himself to shed. On his desk, contracts, mergers, numbers, everything that made him powerful, everything that made him empty. His assistant's knock broke the silence. "Sir, there's been an accident." A woman, Grace Miller. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. For a second, his mind refused to process it. Grace, the one woman who'd seen through his arrogance. The one who had walked away 3 years ago when he chose his empire over her heart. Within minutes, he was racing through the city, tires splashing through puddles that mirrored the chaos inside him. The hospital's smell, antiseptic, sterile, hit him like guilt. He didn't belong here, not anymore. But his legs moved on their own. Straight to the emergency wing. A nurse recognized him. "Mr. Cross, you're listed as her emergency contact." His voice cracked. "What happened?" "Car accident. Severe impact. She's stable now, but she's been through a lot." He swallowed hard, stepping into the dim hospital room. Grace lay there, pale, fragile, her arm bandaged. Machines hummed around her. Her chest rose and fell slowly, like waves returning to shore after a storm. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, he suddenly couldn't breathe. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Grace, it's me." No answer. He noticed a small duffel bag on the chair beside her. The zipper was half open. Inside a few clothes, a broken phone, and an envelope. Crumpled, worn, but with his name written in faded ink. He hesitated, fingers trembling, then opened it. Inside was an ultrasound photo, the black and white blur of life, 2 years old. The date marked 2 months after she left him. For a moment, the world tilted, his vision blurred. A note fell from the envelope, barely legible, but it read, "I didn't want your money, just your heart, but she deserves better than your silence." Liam sank into the chair beside the bed, his heart breaking open for the first time in years. All his power, his wealth, none of it could undo what he'd missed. A quiet voice interrupted his spiral. She was awake for a few minutes, the nurse said gently. She asked if someone named Liam ever called. He couldn't answer, his throat burned. Hours passed. He sat there, holding her hand, replaying the last conversation they ever had. His cold words, her tearful silence. Now, in this sterile room, he realized what success had cost him. He hadn't just lost Grace, he'd lost a daughter he never knew existed. The heart monitor beeped steadily, matching the ache in his chest. For once, the CEO who controlled everything found something he couldn't command, a second chance. And as dawn crept through the hospital blinds, Liam Cross made a silent promise. If she survived, he'd never let her face another storm alone. The morning light bled through the hospital blinds, painting soft gold on Grace's pale face. Liam hadn't moved all night. His suit jacket lay crumpled over the chair, his eyes hollow from hours of guilt and realization. He'd faced boardrooms full of enemies and never flinched, but this small, unconscious woman and a faded ultrasound photo had broken him in ways no corporate war ever could. The door opened quietly. A nurse peeked in. "Mr. Cross, there's someone asking for Ms. Miller." He frowned. "Who?" The nurse stepped aside, revealing a little girl, barely 2 years old. Curly brown hair, wide blue eyes that mirrored his own. Liam's heart stopped. The child clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest and stared up at him with innocent confusion. "Mama," she whispered. His throat closed. "She's resting, sweetheart," he managed, his voice trembling. The nurse knelt beside the girl. "Her name's Lila," she said softly. "She was with her sitter when the accident happened. We called her in this morning." Liam's knees felt weak. He looked at the girl, the curve of her nose, the same as Grace's, but those eyes, those unmistakable eyes were his. He crouched down slowly. "Hey Lila," he said gently, "do you know me?" She tilted her head, clutching her toy tighter. "Mommy says my daddy's busy." It was a knife to the heart, simple, innocent words, slicing through years of silence. The nurse stood quietly in the corner, pretending to check a chart as tears pricked Liam's eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too small for what he was feeling. Instead, he held out a hand. "Would you like to sit with your mom?" Leela nodded shyly, her tiny fingers slipping into his. That small touch, fragile, warm, shattered every wall he'd ever built. They stood beside Grace's bed. Leela climbed onto the chair beside her mother and rested her hand on Grace's arm. "Wake up, Mommy," she whispered. Liam looked away, blinking back the flood behind his eyes. The room filled with the quiet sound of the heart monitor, the rhythm of life, of hope, of a second chance he didn't deserve, but would fight for. Hours passed before Grace stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, weak and slow. "Liam," she whispered, her voice rough. He stood immediately, gripping her hand. "I'm here. You're okay? Just rest." She looked around, confusion clouding her eyes. Lila, the little girl, giggled softly, her tiny hand patting her mother's cheek. "Mommy." Grace smiled faintly, then turned her gaze to Liam, full of questions, pain, and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled shakily. "They called me. I had no idea, Grace. About her. About any of it." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You weren't supposed to. I didn't want your money, Liam. I just couldn't let her grow up in your world. You never wanted this life." He crouched beside her bed, his voice breaking. "You were wrong. I didn't know what I wanted until now. I spent years building walls to keep everything out, but all I did was lock myself in." Grace's lips trembled. "She's your daughter. I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "And she's perfect." Silence settled, heavy but healing. The nurse entered softly. "Visiting hours are over, Mr. Cross. Ms. Miller needs rest." He nodded but didn't move right away. Instead, he leaned closer to Grace. "I'm not leaving this time," he said quietly. "Not you, not her." When he finally stepped out into the corridor, he looked through the glass window one last time. Lila was curled up beside her mother, fast asleep, her small hand gripping Grace's fingers. Liam pressed his palm to the glass, his reflection staring back, a man who once thought love made him weak. But now, standing outside that hospital room, he realized it was the only thing that ever made him human. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed, his assistant calling about a crisis meeting. He looked at the screen for a long moment, then powered it off. For the first time in his life, business could wait. 2 days passed. The hospital room became a quiet world of whispers, lullabies, and unspoken truths. Grace was recovering slowly. Lila never left her side, always humming softly or drawing on scraps of paper the nurses gave her. Liam stayed nearby, always just outside the door, close enough to protect, far enough not to overwhelm. He'd brought fresh flowers, warm meals, even a small stuffed bear for Leela, but every time Grace looked at him, her eyes carried both gratitude and a wall he couldn't climb. On the third morning, she finally said it. "You can't fix what you broke with money, Liam." Her voice was calm, but every word hit harder than any boardroom confrontation he'd ever faced. "I'm not trying to buy forgiveness," he said softly. "I just want to be here." She turned her face toward the window, the sunlight tracing the edge of her scar. "You don't get to just be here now. You left when I needed you most. You made it clear what mattered to you, contracts, clients, not me." He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "You think I don't live with that regret every single day?" Grace's lips trembled, but she held her ground. "Regret doesn't change the past. I had to raise her alone, Liam. Every doctor visit, every night she cried. I wished you cared enough to call." He flinched. "I didn't know," he said. "If I had, you would have sent a check." She cut in, bitter. Her words sliced clean through his heart. For a moment, he said nothing, just looked at her, not as a CEO, but as a man stripped of everything, except honesty. "I deserved that," he admitted, "but Grace, seeing her, our daughter, it's like breathing for the first time in years. You might not believe me, but I don't want to fix this with money. I just want a chance to be her father. To be better." Grace stared at him, eyes wet but guarded. "You don't get to decide that now." He nodded slowly. "Then tell me what I have to do." Silence. Lila stirred in her sleep beside Grace, clutching the stuffed rabbit he'd brought. The sight softened something in Grace's expression, just slightly. "Start by being patient," she said quietly. "She doesn't know you, and I'm not ready to trust you." He nodded again, a small, broken smile tugging at his lips. "Then I'll earn it." Later that day, while Grace rested, Liam sat in the hospital cafeteria. staring at his untouched coffee. The world outside moved on. Meetings were missed, deals delayed, but for once, none of it mattered. His phone buzzed again. His assistant, Rebecca. "Sir, the investors are waiting. We need you in the meeting." He typed back one word. "Later." A few minutes later, a soft giggle caught his attention. He turned and there was Lila, waddling through the hallway with her nurse. She saw him and ran toward him, tiny arms outstretched. "Mr. Liam," she squealed. He blinked in surprise, kneeling down. "You remember my name?" She nodded proudly. "You brought the bunny." He laughed softly, tears threatening. "Yeah, I did." She tugged his hand. "Mommy says I can draw you something." They sat together at a small table. She drew a house, crooked lines, stick figures, and a sun that filled half the page. "That's me," she said, pointing at the small girl. "That's Mommy, and that's you." He froze. "Me?" Leela grinned. "You look sad, so I drew you smiling." Something in him cracked open. A 2-year-old had done what no therapist, no success, no amount of time had managed, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could be forgiven. When Grace saw them later, her daughter laughing, Liam smiling, her chest tightened. She didn't trust him yet, but in that moment, she saw a glimpse of the man she once fell in love with. Not the CEO, not the headline, just Liam. And for the first time since the accident, hope flickered quietly in the corners of her heart. A week later, Grace was discharged from the hospital. Her movements were slow, careful, but she insisted on walking out on her own. Liam followed a few steps behind, carrying her small overnight bag and Leela's backpack. He'd offered his car, his driver, even a suite at the city's best hotel, but Grace refused every offer. "I'm not your charity case, Liam," she said firmly. "I know," he replied softly. "You never were." They ended up at her small apartment in Brooklyn, modest, warm, full of toys, laundry, and life. It was nothing like the polished world he lived in, yet standing there, he realized this cramped apartment held more love than his entire mansion ever had. Leela ran to her toy corner, giggling. Grace watched her, her eyes softening. Liam stood near the doorway, awkward and unsure, a billionaire who suddenly didn't know where he belonged. Grace finally sighed. "You can stay for coffee." "Just coffee?" He smiled faintly. "That's already more than I deserve." The next few days blurred into a strange new rhythm. Every morning, Liam stopped by with groceries or small gifts, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful things. Books for Grace, a new set of crayons for Leela. Sometimes, he helped fix a leaky faucet or cooked dinner, though Grace never asked. Each time she tried to tell him he didn't have to, he just smiled and said, "I want to." One evening, Grace found him sitting on the floor with Lila, helping her build a block tower. "You know," Grace said quietly, arms crossed, "that tower's going to collapse if you keep stacking without a base." Liam looked up, grinning sheepishly. "Story of my life." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. Leela giggled, placing the last block on top. "Daddy, look." The word froze them both. Grace's breath caught. Liam looked stunned, as if the air had been punched from his chest. He blinked rapidly, his throat tight. "Say that again?" Leela tilted her head, confused by the emotion in his eyes. "Daddy." Grace knelt beside her, tears slipping free. "Sweetheart." But Liam interrupted gently, his voice trembling. "No, it's okay." He turned to Grace, his eyes glistening. "If she wants to call me that, she can. I'll earn it every day." For the first time, Grace didn't stop him. She sought the truth behind his words. This wasn't the same man who'd chosen money over love. He was slower now, softer, human. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Grace stood on the small balcony while Liam lingered by the doorway. The city lights flickered like stars between them. "She looks just like you when she's stubborn," he said quietly. Grace smiled faintly. "She gets that from both of us." They laughed softly, and the sound felt like something long lost returning home. Then, silence. Not awkward, just full. "I used to think love made me weak," Liam admitted, his voice low. "Turns out, living without it made me hollow." Grace looked at him, not the CEO, not the millionaire, just the man she'd loved once. "You broke us once, Liam. I can't let that happen again." "I know," he said, "but I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. Just a chance to keep showing up." She met his gaze for a long moment, then whispered, "Then show up." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, he became part of their lives, not as a savior, but as a presence. He picked Leela up from daycare when Grace worked late. He learned how to braid her messy curls, how to pack snacks without forgetting her juice box. He even started leaving his phone in the car during dinner, something no one in his company thought possible. The once ruthless CEO, who lived by deadlines, was now learning that love doesn't need an appointment. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, Leela holding both their hands, Grace looked at him sideways. "You're changing, Liam." He smiled softly. "Maybe I'm just finally becoming the man you believed I could be." She didn't answer, but her fingers brushed his, not accidentally this time. And for Liam Cross, that small touch meant more than any victory he'd ever known. 3 months later, the world that once revolved around profit margins now revolved around bedtime stories and little giggles. Liam Cross had changed, not because of guilt, but because of love. He'd started working remotely 3 days a week, something his board had called unthinkable. But nothing was more important than mornings with Lila and evenings with Grace. Grace still moved carefully, her scars slowly healing, but her heart, too, was mending in quiet ways. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, she stood in the kitchen, making soup while Lila scribbled on paper beside her. The door opened, and Liam walked in drenched from the storm, holding a small cake box. "You're soaked," Grace exclaimed. He grinned, brushing water from his hair. "Worth it." Leela wanted cake. Leela squealed, "Strawberry, only the best." Grace rolled her eyes, fighting a smile. "You're going to spoil her?" Liam looked at both of them, warmth in his eyes. "I intend to." They laughed together, the kind of easy laughter that once felt impossible. As they sat down, Grace noticed something. Liam wasn't wearing his usual Rolex or suit. Instead, he looked normal, human. The CEO mask was gone. "You missed another meeting, didn't you?" she teased. He shrugged. "They'll survive. I used to think the company couldn't run without me. Turns out, I was the one who didn't know how to live without you." Her eyes softened, a tear slipping down before she could stop it. "Liam," she whispered. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "I spent years chasing everything that didn't matter. But this," he glanced at Leela, giggling with frosting on her nose. "This is everything." Grace smiled faintly. "You always did know how to say the right thing when it was almost too late." He laughed softly. "Then maybe it's time I start saying them early." That weekend, he invited them both to his mansion, the same house that once echoed with emptiness. Now, toys littered the marble floors, children's drawings covered the fridge, and the cold halls were filled with the sound of laughter. Leela ran through the corridors, her tiny footsteps echoing. "It's like a castle," she shouted. Grace smiled. "It used to feel like one," she said quietly. "Beautiful, but lonely." Liam turned to her, eyes gentle. "Not anymore." As evening fell, they stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. Grace leaned on the railing, hair swaying in the breeze. "You really let it all go, didn't you?" He nodded. "The board offered me a record deal last month. I said no." She turned to him in disbelief. "You said no?" He smiled softly. "Because every contract I sign now has to include her name. And yours." Grace blinked, overwhelmed. "Liam." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I can't undo the years I wasted, but I can promise you this. No more meetings that matter more than family. No more running from what I feel. I love you, Grace." "I never stopped." Tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to hate you for so long," she whispered. "But the truth is, I never stopped loving you either." For the first time, they kissed, slow, real, full of every word they never said. Lila's laughter echoed from inside, calling out, "Mommy, Daddy, look." They broke apart, smiling. Liam wrapped an arm around Grace as they walked inside. Lila was holding a crayon drawing a family of 3, standing under a rainbow. "Us," she said proudly. Grace knelt, eyes misty. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Liam smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "You're our masterpiece." The storm outside faded, replaced by the warmth of something stronger, the sound of healing, of home. For the first time, Liam Cross wasn't the man who built towers. He was the man who built a family. He was a powerful millionaire CEO who lost the love of his life in a tragic accident. 2 years later, a single hospital call turned his world upside down because the woman he thought was gone had survived, and with her was a little girl with his smile. Watch this heart-wrenching billionaire love story filled with secrets, forgiveness, and the kind of love that never truly dies. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional short stories that touch your heart.